Welcome to BadenStreet Settlement, where we have so much to offer.
Here at BadenStreet, we have early pre-K.
And we have a top-notch child development center that serves children 6 weeks to 12 years old.
También tenemos comida y ropas para apoyarte en una emergencia.
At BadenStreet Settlement, we also have food and clothing for an emergency.
Nuestro programa de salud dirigido a la conducta humana ofrece servicios para personas adultas con alguna discapacidad en el desarrollo o enfermedades mentales, incluyendo el apoyo para establecer metas y servicios.
Our Digital Arts Center has the technology to improve your learning and make your life easier.
Did you know that we have programs especially for teens?
Si tienes 18 años o más, tenemos un programa excelente contra el abuso de sustancias controladas.
If you are 18 and over, we have an excellent chemical dependency program.
Yeah, I'm BadenStreet. I love BadenStreet.
Hi, I'm Mike Marsh. This is the BadenStreet Settlement Monthly Town Talk. This is your chance to connect with what's going on at BadenStreet. Come on in, let's talk. Hi, everybody. Let's talk. Welcome to our first town talk of the new year. And we're trying something a little bit different tonight for our town talk. In our previous town talks, we actually spotlighted each of our programs. But tonight's town talk is going to be much more topic driven. And we are going to talk about understanding human trafficking tonight. We all know that there are a lot of misconceptions about human trafficking. I think people assume that it takes certain forms, but I think in the end, what it means is depriving a person of their freedom and their free will. And so we're gonna have some experts speak with us tonight about human trafficking. We are pleased to have Jake Bishop and Jennifer Quick. Jake is from our behavioral health group and Jennifer is from MCTP. We're also pleased to have Judge Ellen Yacknin from Rochester City Court, Jule Chapus, and Melanie Blow. But we're going to start off this town talk by playing a video, which I think will help to illustrate some of the issues around human trafficking.
I was born and raised in a small town in Southern Oregon, and I was a good kid in school. I grew up in a normal middle-class family. I got great grades. I was really active in sports, and I even graduated a year early. I was accepted into Oregon State University, and I had my dorm room already assigned, and I was really excited to move up to Corvallis. But that summer, I got pregnant by my boyfriend, and I had to make a real tough decision whether I was going to keep my baby and unenroll from university or get an abortion and keep it all a secret. And that was a really tough summer for me. After I had the baby, I had some friends that had gone up to U of O to go to college, and they had an extra room in one of their apartments. It was at that time that I met a boy or a guy who pretended to take interest in me. I really thought he liked me and we got along really well. He was really funny and charming, and he had a nice car, and he always picked up the tab. He had nice clothes. And he told me he was a record producer, that he had a band up in Portland, and that's why he frequently went out of town. There's a saying that says, when you take a child by the hand, you take the mother by the heart. And I really think that's what happened for me, because I had this new little girl and this man who showed this desperate attention towards her, like he wanted to really help make this family that I really wanted for my daughter. And he invited me to move in with him after about 6 months of dating. And I was really excited when I brought him down to Southern Oregon to meet my family, and everything seemed fine until we arrived in Las Vegas. He said we were moving there because that was the entertainment capital of the world, and being a record producer and having a band, that's where they were going to get the most gigs and the most jobs, and that's where his job was leading him. So I desperately wanted to go with him, to be with him, and to start this family that he promised me. He pulled up to an escort service and he said, "This is how it works in Vegas. I've spent a lot of money to get you here. I put first and last on an apartment. I filled your fridge up with food, and you're gonna need to earn that money back." And I felt trapped. I felt like, how am I gonna get out of this? And you didn't know if you were gonna live or die. You didn't know what he was gonna do or what he was capable of. And so it was really scary. I can remember just running through the casino thinking, like, these people don't even have a clue what's going on. They're just, cha-ching, cha-ching, Las Vegas, yay! And they're doing all this stuff, and I'm running for my life. I'm running from a man that has forced me into doing things that I didn't want to do. When you have a trafficker that's waiting at home with your child and says, if you don't bring home $1,500, you're gonna find your daughter out on the corner, I think I was probably more frightened to go home than I was to be in the room. Because if you got robbed, it was your fault for being stupid. If you got raped, it was your fault for not watching your back. Anything that happened to you was typically your fault, and you incurred more punishment for allowing those things to happen to you. So it made you always walk in fear of your trafficker. I'm Rebecca Bender, and I'm a survivor of sex trafficking. I lived in a community where no services existed, and I realized very quickly I couldn't possibly be the only survivor who lived in a small town. At that time, I was finishing getting my degree online, and so it suddenly hit me one day. If I can get a master's degree online, surely I can mentor girls online. And with that, we founded Rebecca Bender Ministries. We developed an online curriculum to help survivors of sex trafficking, regardless of where they live. They're now able to log in and receive one-on-one mentoring using innovative technology like Skype and Zoom. We have an online discussion forum and homework classes, really just trying to help survivors be all that they were created to be. We want to come alongside them, partner with career coaches and life coaches and other survivor leaders that can mentor them towards their future. Everyone was created for greatness, and we want to help pull that out of survivors. We want to help them, give them an opportunity to look into what they're created for. You know, when you're being trafficked, you're not given the opportunity to explore all of your talents and abilities. You're used for one thing. And our organization really tries to help women figure out what it is that they're created to do. One of the other things that Rebecca Bender Ministries does is we have a speakers team that equips first responders all over the US. We train over 6,100 professionals a year, medical service providers, emergency room doctors, paramedics, law enforcement, SVU, FBI, faith-based communities, and advocates within any service. It's a real honor to be able to help people understand what sex trafficking looks like in their community and give them tools and steps to take once they suspect exploitation exists with someone they're working with. One of the most impactful things that we do in our ministry is seeing women go from victim to survivor to leader. When we see girls get their dream job, that's what does it for me. I'm Rebecca Bender. I'm a survivor of sex trafficking, but I'm more than just my story. We want to help men and women go after all that God has created them to be. At RBM, we want to change the mindset of a culture and let people know that their past doesn't have to define nor determine their destiny.
Wow, what a video. I think it illustrates some of the issues around human trafficking, but it's also positive to see somebody come through that ordeal. Tonight, what we'd like to do is I'll have each of the panelists introduce themselves, and then we hope to have a very interactive discussion with our panelists. And of course, we'll also take questions from our audience. I'd ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and then tell us a little bit about their interaction with human trafficking. Let's start with Judge Yacknin.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to this extremely important panel. Let me just ask, how much time do I have for opening remarks here?
About 5 minutes or so.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you. Well, this is an extremely important topic. It does happen to be Human Trafficking Survivors Month, so it's a good time to be talking about this topic. I actually got involved with the issues of human trafficking long before I became a judge. I was introduced to and got active with a woman named Anita Jane, who was in Rochester, New York, who herself was a survivor, who started a house on Lyle Avenue called the Mary Magdalene House, for women who were walking up and down Lyle Avenue, soliciting johns for selling themselves. And that seems to be a really still an area of Rochester, New York, where a lot of prostitution does occur. And I worked with Anita for a very, very long time. She was a survivor. She did end up dying from an overdose. And that's one thing that I think is important to realize. It's really phenomenal to see that in the videos, those women who are survivors themselves have turned their lives around so remarkably and have been very successful. And it's wonderful to see that they're involved in helping other women. A lot of women struggle for a very, very, very long time because once somebody is at risk of sexual exploitation, meaning they've either been trafficked or they've been sexually abused or they've been in a position where they have been abused by sexual partners or even sold, the trauma that exists in their lives is extremely deep and extremely painful. And it takes a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of support for women to be able to leave the life. In 2013, the New York State court system implemented the very first statewide set of human trafficking courts. And Rochester was lucky enough to be able to be one of the founding courts of the New York State human trafficking courts system. And I became the presiding judge over that court. The people who came into our court at first, for the first few years, it was limited to people, mostly women, but also men, who had been arrested for the crime of prostitution and related prostitution-related crimes, like massage parlor practice without a license. So it was easy to identify victims. That has since expanded. Our jurisdiction has since expanded to include anyone who's in the criminal justice system as a defendant who is either has been or is or will be at risk of sexual exploitation. The overwhelming number of people who we have had participants in our court, and they're all defendants, they've all been charged with crimes, but we give them an opportunity to be willing to accept the resources and support that we have to offer them in order to deal with their multitude of problems. We sort of call ourselves a multi-treatment court because we deal with drug issues, we deal with their sexual abuse issues, we deal with their lack of housing issues, and most importantly, we deal with their mental health issues, most importantly, throughout the entire process and our interaction with them. We deal with their trauma, which is the most important thing, and all of our support and resources are provided in an extremely trauma-informed and educated manner, which is taking our participants where they are and making little steps. I'm going to stop now, but we can talk more about the court later.
Melanie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Melanie Blow. I'm the executive director of the Stop Abuse campaign. We are an organization that prevents adverse childhood experiences, which are 10 forms of childhood trauma. And I'm a founding member and a board member of the Rochester Regional Coalition Against Human Trafficking. The coalition exists, it was incorporated about 10 years ago to basically fill gaps in the community about things in this arena. And we spent quite a while figuring out what even made sense. Some of the things that we settled on were there was nobody in the community who could consistently do all of the public education work that needed to be done. So we started doing that. And there was nobody in the community who could do a lot of legislative advocacy. So we started taking on that. I have a lot of experience in that through my life, all the rest of the things I've done in my life. So the coalition does that. I myself have also done outreach with the trafficking victims on Lyle Avenue, and I've had a lot of experience with them and gone through trauma histories with them and really come to understand that population a little bit. I sit in on Judge Yacknin's court once in a while, just to keep the faces current in my mind. And I think that's about it.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Okay, hi guys, I'm Julie, and I'm the founder and director of Christ for Kids Ministries, which has opened up a subsidiary, Miss Julie's School of Beauty. We are in the process of opening up a cosmetology school for at-risk and traffic survivors. There are programs like this that exist in Cambodia. There's another one that exists in the Philippines, but nothing exists in the United States whatsoever. So we are the first of its kind in the entire nation to open up a program like this. And the reason being why this is such a need is because we know that working with survivors, trying to get a job, like that video when she was like, oh my gosh, the dream job, sometimes that's very, very difficult for some survivors to actually attain because of a background. And so in the cosmetology field, we're actually able to help eradicate your past, where you can completely start fresh and you will never be encountering a background check ever again with this license, which we definitely want to help all of the survivors get. And I have questions all the time, what if, Julie, somebody doesn't want to do hair? What if they don't want to do nails? It still is a very good thing to get this license, because let's say we get somebody that's just have great gifts of sales, they're an awesome salesperson. There's so many different companies within our industry. You take Paul Mitchell, Redken, Goldwell, Joico. I mean, there's just so many, and they're always looking to hire cosmetologists to become their sales representatives, where we can fly these girls across the nation to go into different salons and sell all this stuff. And it's really a fun environment. It's amazing, but really to be able to let somebody know that you can have a lucrative, sustainable career and your background, you don't have to go through traumatic history every time you sit down to have a job interview. It's an amazing gift to be able to give these girls. And I'm just so excited to be able to bring that here to Rochester.
Hey, my name is Jake Bishop. I'm a care manager and peer engagement specialist at BadenStreet Settlement. I've had the honor and pleasure to work with several human trafficking clients, whether it's in a peer capacity or as their care manager. It can be frustrating work sometimes, and they do test your patience. But at the end of the day, I'm very grateful for the work we've been able to accomplish through BadenStreet. We've got a great team that is focused on helping these women retake their lives. And I'm very grateful for the resources in Rochester that are available to these women, whether it's Safe Court with Judge Yacknin, or Jule Chapus with the Beauty School, or Melanie Blow. All these resources are so helpful to these women, and even more helpful to places that do care management and chemical dependency like BadenStreet. And I'm very happy to be part of this panel and happy to share with everyone today. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our panelists for those amazing backgrounds and shares. As mentioned before, both Jake and myself work for BadenStreet Settlement of Rochester, and we are going to be engaging our panelists this evening with questions, and we encourage you to type in your questions that you may have regarding human trafficking. We understand that for some people it is a very lofty subject matter and maybe even difficult to comprehend what it really is, but hopefully the video has provided some insight as well as the descriptors that were given by our panelists. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump right in, and anyone is welcome to answer. Jake and I are going to tag team here, but how common is human trafficking, would you say, more specifically for our area?
Well, you know that human trafficking is New York State, we're the 4th in the entire nation. Florida's number 3. Melanie would be able to know the first state, but I know that we're 4th. And I think that that's a huge problem, and we get questions a lot. Why are we 4th in the state? And I have to think that, we are close to the Canadian border. I do think living near a border is absolutely an issue. I also know that, you know, at least in my experience, we get girls from all over the nation that comes to Rochester because, let's say, like, I know, for instance, one program just, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had to take a survivor from Florida and bring them here to Rochester because they were unsafe. You know, somebody was after them in that state. And so you do get this cross movement sometimes with survivors where we actually have to relocate in order to keep people safe.
Thank you so much, Julie.
The Polaris Project, which is a national organization that tracks and provides educational materials about human trafficking, has produced a pretty sobering map of the extent of human trafficking. And if you get a chance to look on their website, it pops up pretty quickly. The map itself shows infrared hotspots of human trafficking in the United States. And when you look at it, you'll see that the Northeast is extremely prevalent and New York State is overwhelmingly fired up far more than the rest of the country. So Julie is absolutely right. The prevalence of human trafficking in New York State is extremely high. But trafficking, when they're looking at those kinds of statistics, at least as far as the Polaris Project is talking about, they're talking about primarily those women who are currently under the control, or men, I suppose, who are currently under the control of the Johns themselves and the traffickers themselves. But the numbers, if you start to add in the numbers of the survivors or women, or in some cases men, who've been discarded by their traffickers because they're overused, or because they're not able to function anymore, or because they've been beaten so badly that the traffickers don't want to use them, or they've escaped, or they've become too drug addicted, very often deliberately at the hands of the traffickers. But women, especially, I'm going to use the word women because that's who we see primarily, they come in and out of what's called the life. Sometimes they will leave the life to try to better themselves and try to escape. And then sometimes they go back because it's their only source of income. It's what they know. People go to what they know in order to survive. So when you add in those people, all of the women, all of the survivors, people who have been involved in trafficking or have been prostituting them, involved in prostitution on the streets, then the numbers become overwhelming. It is really important for everybody who understands human trafficking to understand that trafficking is an industry. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is second only to the gun trade in terms of the amount of money that it generates. And it's definitely an illegal industry.
I think for being somebody who was new to learning about human trafficking at BadenStreet settlement, hearing women talked about as a product in the billions of dollars in a global market was jarring, especially when Julie was telling me some of the numbers were up in, $20 billion.
Thank you so much for that. So just to kind of paint a picture for folks, a lot of times we do think of trafficking as sex traffic, but there's also labor traffic. And do you see one more than the other in the work that you're doing?
I'll take a stab at that. So labor trafficking is very tricky to identify. Sex trafficking is a lot easier because anyone who is engaged in commercial sex work, anyone who is engaged in sex for money, is part of that. Is automatically that they're doing something illegal. Law enforcement is going to be on it, and it's very the next question for them is there force, fraud, or coercion that's keeping them in that? Right. Labor trafficking is very different because we're supposed to work for a living. And so it's a lot harder to figure that out. labor traffickers tend to be very good. They tend to manipulate people in other ways. Labor trafficking, unlike sex trafficking, is very strongly tied to immigrants. It's very strongly tied to visas, which we may issue completely legally, but then there is someone who withdraws them or threatens to withdraw them, and that becomes a source of manipulation. And then that source of manipulation is used to get them to work in illegal conditions, do work for unconscionable wages, and even potentially do illegal things. There is also an element of labor trafficking that is not really well understood, especially locally, that involves like people being forced to do illegal things like begging, begging and panhandling, or even dealing drugs. That happens. No one is doing a terribly good job locally or even nationally at getting the narratives about those and hammering down statistics, but it does happen.
Thank you, Melanie.
So I guess that brings me to the next question. What do we do if we think we recognize a human trafficking victim? I know Julie has a few answers there.
Well, it's tricky because, you don't want to just peg people and assume, that's one thing that part of the training that we do in salons and the spas and things like this is, sometimes people can be sitting right in our chair and it's hard to know sometimes. But there are definitely, at least from the cosmetology field, there are definitely signs that we can see, like when we're washing somebody's hair or we're doing something, we're always checking the head. And so you can clearly see visible marks sometimes on people, which as a stylist, we're in a very unique position to be able to talk to our client, because it's very rare that you get to have somebody that you have your hands on their hair and they're stuck in that chair for a while. So we can actually create, that atmosphere for conversations. Wow, I see some bruising here. Are you okay? And sometimes you'll get people that open right up and want to talk about what's happening to them. You might get other people that, oh no, I fell, and so it's hard sometimes because you don't know where somebody's at and if they're ready to really talk about what's going on with them. As a stylist, honestly, our clients tell us more than they tell their own doctors. So I just want to say, I think it's very, very important for cosmetologists to have this kind of training, because we're told things that they would never tell anybody else in their life. And so we're in a unique position where we can actually really step in and help somebody if we know what to do and know what signs to look for. And it's not always bruising. I mean, there are a lot of girls that absolutely their traffickers will grab them by the back of their neck and you're going to see marks. There is that. But it's not always. It's not 100% that, a girl has to have bruises to be trafficked. That's not the case either. And sometimes what we see also is, and, Judge Yacknin probably sees this as well, but oftentimes we'll get a lot of domestic violence kinds of issues that can kind of overlap the trafficking where, this girl maybe hasn't necessarily been exploited sexually, but she's being, you see bruises everywhere and something's going on. And, you don't want to just assume like, oh, wow, she's been trafficked. It really creates that kind of atmosphere where you need to talk to your clients and, let them know, I see something and I can help, if you want me to. And, we can make a phone call together. Nobody has to know. And, there's safe ways to do this. And of course, we do training on how to keep stylists safe. But absolutely, I think cosmetologists see a whole lot of things that maybe other professions would never see, because we're just that close to the person physically.
Thank you.
The other benefit,
go ahead.
That the other benefit that Julie has that we don't have in court is that courts are open to the public. We have no ability to close them to the public. And we know that when our participants come to court, very often their traffickers, their abusers are there watching. It's a complicated dance for them. Sometimes abusers and traffickers want their people to be in the court as defendants because they know that there's some sort of way to control them. And that's through the court system. They know where the defendants are going to be. They know where the women are going to be, which is in the court once a month when they come in to visit us. And so when they're in the courthouse, I personally, sitting at the bench, cannot speak to them as frankly as Julie can when they're in the hairdresser's seat. I'm guessing that the guys, the abusers, the traffickers don't come and hang out for an hour in the beauty salon. So it does give those women who are willing to talk an opportunity to feel safe. The most important thing that I've been taught that anyone can do if they think that somebody is being abused and you recognize that is to say, I'm here to help if you would like. I'm here to help if you would like. I can give you some resources if you'd like. And just to offer help, because you never know when that person is in an unsafe situation. Very often they're scared to death. They've been told that if you step outside the rules that I've set for you, then I will kill your family. I will harm your children. I will do everything I can to make your life totally miserable. They were already being controlled very often by having no access to money, no access to credit cards. And so they feel unsafe by even thinking about reaching out. So it's a long, long process. When they are arrested for whatever crimes they are, and they choose to participate in what we're now calling our SAFE court, instead of human trafficking court, our SAFE stands for Surviving and Finding Empowerment Court. And we just implemented that name just a couple of weeks ago. We're really proud of it. It takes a long time, sometimes up to several months, before the participants are willing to share a lot of their concerns with us and willing to trust us. I have always felt that the most important thing that I can do as a judge, the most important thing that our coordinator and case manager can do is to try to work with the woman where she is to help her learn to trust us more than they trust their abuser. And once they make that step of being able to trust us more than they trust their abuser for safety and support, then that's where we see real progress.
Thanks. There's a question that came in from the audience in regard to identification of victims, and that's tattoos or marks on the neck.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes traffickers they brand the girls, it'll sometimes have daddy written. You can see tattoos. It's usually behind the ears or the very nape of the neck, like right where I want to say your hairline, it's hidden, but it's there. And it's a way to brand these girls. It's horrible. They're treated like property, like slaves. I mean, it's modern day slavery is what it is.
Well,
it's another sign to look for, if especially for a cosmetologist, those are signs to look for. Absolutely. The tattooing, the branding, the bruises. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for that question, because that was from Mary Jo Cooligan of Angels of Mercy. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mary Jo.
That is a very good question. One of the things that the New York State court system has done, which is pretty remarkable, is over the last couple of years, those of us who work in the human trafficking courts and the SAFE court have developed a screening tool for other courts who haven't been trained as much as we are, for lawyers, for judges, but really it could be used by anyone in terms of how to identify possible victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. And the screening tool does identify things like tattoos and other marks, but it also identifies subtle cues like looking around constantly, turning to somebody else in the audience for answers to questions, being nervous, not looking at you. There's various physical cues. One of the things that our coordinator, Andrea Seveny, who, as well as our case manager, Francina Decino, are very well trained at is helping other people be able to use the screening tool to help identify people who might be in the court system who could benefit from participation in our court, take advantage of it. One important thing about the screening tool that we use is we do not ask questions of people to figure out if they might be victims of trafficking or exploitation. They're all visual cues, because it is scary to have to be facing those kinds of questions, especially in the court system, especially when women are there as defendants being charged with crimes, especially when it could be a judge with a lot of authority talking down to them, especially when their abusers could be in the courtroom. We never, ever, ever screen people initially from the screening tool, using the screening tool by asking questions. It's just visual. But when participants choose to come to our court, then Andrea and Alfonsina have very specific questions, knowing that they're speaking to them one-on-one and know how to work with them in a way that doesn't traumatize them in terms of asking those questions. We can share that screening tool. It's not something that, oh, this is specialized information, only a judge is going to understand it. It's a very, very common sense document, and I'm happy to send it to Jake and Jennifer and everybody, and feel free to share it.
Absolutely. I know we have another question in the chat, but as an educator, having tips and tools is crucial. And I know a lot of folks like to think of a flow chart. Okay, if I'm at this place, do I go right or do I go left? Do I ask them directly, or do I, so I think a lot of folks might be in the position where they're just not sure where to start or what to do first. And a tool like that could be very beneficial. I do want to point out that we had a question here. Are there human trafficking factors specific to Rochester? Anything specific about Rochester that anyone would like to talk about?
The only thing that comes to mind, I mean, human trafficking is found everywhere. It really is. It wouldn't be such a huge industry if it wasn't. The things that are kind of specific to this area, we do have a lot of labor trafficking because we have New York is such a diverse state. We have farms. We have active farms in the same county that we've got, a big bustling city. And as Judge Yacknin mentioned earlier, we do have Lyell Avenue, and Lyell Avenue is infamous for decades as being what's called an open air sex market. When I do lectures about human trafficking, if I'm going out of the county, I ask people, have you ever heard of Lyell Avenue? And I've never been asked to go further than 100 miles from Monroe County, but I've been 100 miles from Monroe County, and people know where Lyell Avenue is. So that sets up a demand-driven economy. People know if they just want to rent somebody for sex, they know at least 100 miles away from here, which is an awfully big radius, they know where to go. That means there are people who are bound and determined to supply them with what they want right there. And so that just keeps the cycle going. And in times when people have tried to disperse it, it still doesn't change anything, because everybody knows, okay, maybe not exactly this street, but this area. And now people can be more sophisticated and can communicate online, yada, yada. But there is that demand, and that very, very specific demand. And that means it's not going to go anywhere until that demand goes away.
I also wanted to say, and unfortunately, there's such a large range
I've had human trafficking clients that have been in court 19 years old all the way until 65 years old.
Yep.
So when it runs a gambit like that, sometimes it's hard to say, this is the one focus that we have. I have this client that was there when a place got raided by police, and she just happened to be there with 10 other girls, and then have one that is only specific to that one girl.
We have a couple of questions that came in from the audience. One was for Judge Yacknin in regard to the infrared map that you talked about. Could you give a specific reference to that, Judge Yacknin?
Yes, it's from an organization called the Polaris Project, Polaris. They have their own website, and I'm pretty sure the map is still on. But you can look for it.
Great, thank you. And then the next question is, what's the arrest and conviction rate of traffickers? Do you think we're making progress?
The answer is that the arrest rate, not to mention the conviction rate, of traffickers is abysmal, not just in New York State, but also throughout the country. Until the last couple of years, and there's always the pre-COVID, post-COVID society that we're dealing with here. But pre-COVID, we would get in our court, in Rochester City Court and in the Town and Villages Court, we would get 20 to 30 people arrested for prostitution-related crimes a month. But the number of, and sometimes they would do John stings. Sometimes the police would go out and pretend to be prostitution women on the street, and then they'd arrest the Johns who were the customers. But that was pretty infrequent. But in terms of the actual pimps, in terms of the actual perpetrators, in terms of the actual traffickers, a couple of years ago, there was an article in the Albany Times-Union, or the Albany Times, the newspaper, that talked about the number of arrests, and it was less than 5 over the last 10, 15 years, less than 5. I have read some articles in the Democrat and Chronicle and local news media about some recent trafficking convictions in federal court, but the numbers are extremely low. And there's a reason for it. In order to find traffickers, it's very, very, very difficult to make a case. The police have to do a lot of undercover work, have to be willing to spend a lot of time working with the women who are being trafficked, who are, like I said, very scared for many, many reasons, but definitely very scared. And it's not unusual that they would be reluctant to speak to the police for many reasons, one of which is being afraid of retribution from their traffickers, but also because customers involved, the police are customers, the judges are customers, law enforcement are customers, lawyers are customers. They have no one to trust. So very, very often, it's very difficult to get the cooperation by the people who've been involved. So it's a lot easier to arrest women than it is to arrest the traffickers. I was aware of one case in Buffalo, New York, which was a case that was pursued by somebody who was a deputy sheriff who was assigned to a trafficking unit, brand new trafficking unit. And she started doing a lot of investigation, uncovered a huge trafficking ring in Buffalo, New York. She also found that there were judges involved, there were lawyers, there were police officers. There were a few convictions, including of the judge who was involved as a trafficker. But she ended up being fired from her job. this woman sheriff. And we spoke a lot about it, but she truly believes that the reason she was fired was because she found too many powerful people involved, and the sheriff's office cut back on its enforcement.
We have another question. Are the people being are the women that are being trafficked local, or are they brought in from outside the area?
In the outreach I did in the Lisle area, a lot of them were largely local, possibly from one of the outlying counties, one of the rural counties around Monroe County. So from Genesee and Livingston and Wayne County. But yes, from what would still be considered generally the greater Rochester area. And just to expound on that, the majority of sex trafficking victims in the United States are American citizens. This notion that people get brought across, imported or exported across national boundaries for sex is not really based in reality, or at least not based in common reality.
I do feel like that is like a cinematographic thing where you imagine that there's immigrants coming across Ukrainian, Mexico, when really, sadly, there's enough people right here that have trauma that they can depend on for that population.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, there are a lot of women who cross state borders or go from New York City to here and then back to New York City. That is pretty common. When there are, for example, when there's major sports events, there aren't that many in Rochester, but when one of the golf tournaments, the PGA Tour was here, we saw a real spike in the number of women who are being trafficked and people from out of town. In the towns and villages surrounding Rochester, they often see women who aren't necessarily local to Rochester. Those are the women who are working at the hotels near the thruways, Henrietta and Greece and Rochester. Now, in New York City, for example, in the Queens Human Trafficking Court, a very large percentage of those persons who are in human trafficking court are Asian, and they're young, and they have been imported, or at a minimum, they came to the United States thinking that somebody was promising them a job, and then the job was, oh, you're going to be my product, you're going to be my commodity to traffic. So it may depend on the area, but Melanie's exactly right. Here, at least the women who we see in human trafficking court, in our safe court, are overwhelmingly local.
One of the Judge Yacknin, you alluded to earlier about the COVID effect on human trafficking. Can you or others elaborate on that, the effect that COVID has had on human trafficking?
I'm sorry, the which effect?
COVID.
The COVID pandemic.
Oh, the COVID. Oh, well, yeah. At least in the judicial system, the police around the state stopped arresting. In order to do a lot of arrests for prostitution, whether you think it's a good thing or not, the way that the women get arrested for the crime itself of prostitution is by male police officers going undercover and soliciting women. That's how they would come into the court. But that stopped after COVID because a lot of police work stopped and people were going underground. So, and in fact, police arrests around the country for a whole lot of things stopped. It wasn't just prostitution, but it did stop. Now, the downside is that trafficking, being exploited, being on the streets didn't stop. It's just that the women weren't being brought in for those kinds of charges to criminal court, which has caused us to have to look really hard and do a lot more screening than we used to do to be able to identify women who might benefit from participating in our court. And those are people who are arrested for things like petty larceny, grand larceny, forgery, massage parlor practice without a license, drug dealing, drug use, illegal drug use, those kinds of crimes, and identifying them. We have thought a lot about it and looked at the population of people who are coming to the court. And I think that our coordinator, Andrea, and Alfonsina, our case manager, and I, as well as my fellow judges, have come to realize that the odds are really, really high that any woman who's arrested for a crime, whatever the crime is, has probably been the victim of sexual exploitation and probably going to benefit from being involved in our court if we can identify them and give them the opportunity to do that. The district attorney's office has to agree to that, but I will say that in Monroe County, the district attorney, Sandra Durley, and her staff have been extremely cooperative in terms of allowing women who fit the criteria for being able to participate in our court. They're willing to give them really good outcomes for participating in our court. It's coercive in the sense that these women are charged with crimes. It could be minor crimes or relatively minor crimes, misdemeanors. It could also be charged with felonies, but it's coercive in the sense that you're going to get a really, really good deal, a very good deal, probably a better deal by participating in the court than you would if you decide not to participate in the court. But it's always their choice. Nobody who's arrested has to participate in our court. And I always tell participants when they come to court, you know, being in our court is a lot of hard work. You're going to have to work really hard because our goal is to help you change what's going on in your life, just to make it a little bit better, to give you some hope and give you a future. It's a lot of work. We will give you as many resources, as much support as we possibly can, mental health, housing, support, as much as we possibly can. But you're the one who has to do the work. We cannot do the work for you. And for a lot of participants in our court, it is a lot easier to do jail time than it is to do the work of our court. And yet we have never, in the entire time that I've been presiding over our safe court, had anyone who we had screened as being eligible for a court refuse to do so. Because deep down, virtually everyone who's come to our court, I'm sure there's always going to be exceptions, but they want to be able to have a better life. This is not a life that they want to be in.
We're using
Thanks to
COVID as
all of our participants. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was going to say we're using COVID to our benefit in the salons because now, you know, everything has to be really sanitary and clean and, you know, social distancing. And so, you know, sometimes what happens is traffickers will bring the girls to a salon and they'll try to pay for the service and they'll want to stand right there to make sure the girl's not going to snitch. Well, now that we have COVID protocols in place, you know, if a guy comes in with somebody and they want to stand right there and they want to order the girl's service and they want to pay for the girl's service, I'm sorry, our policy is you need to wait in the waiting room and only she is allowed to go back with us. And so we are able to actually create more distance between some people. Because I know earlier somebody had said, well, you know, I'm sure a trafficker isn't going to probably stay in a hair salon. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised at some of the guys that really want to sit right there by their side and pull up a chair while she's getting her hair done. And you know, traffickers, they use salons in many different ways. Part of it can be the grooming process to try to, you know, show the girl, oh, I'm going to meet one of your needs. You know, you need to have your hair done. Let me help you with that. You know, it's all part of manipulation or whatever. But then you also get the traffickers that now we need to change the way she looks because people are looking for her. So it's crazy what happens in a salon. That's all I'm saying.
So I really appreciate this discussion. I'd like to just give everybody maybe 2 minutes each to wrap up with some parting words of wisdom that you might have. We'll start with Judge Yacknin.
Okay, the first thing I want to say is thank you for having this panel, and thank you very much to BadenStreet Settlement for your efforts to work with this population. As I'm sure your counselors are all aware, and as we've talked about a little bit, it's a long journey to work with this population. And people like Lydia, who I've recently met, and other people on your staff are phenomenal and just extremely dedicated. And we really appreciate the support you've given to our court to enable it to be successful. We could not survive in terms of being able to offer resources to the court because we were just a court without the help from agencies in the community. And I'm very excited about Julie's program. That is going to be tremendous in terms of being able to offer real life money, job, hope for participants in our court. It's a long process. And what I have come to realize over the years I've been presiding is that if you're going to be involved in trying to help women and survivors and victims of trafficking, is that it takes, from my perspective, two things: a lot of compassion and a huge amount of patience. And if you're willing to give that, then you're going to be a tremendously valuable resource for women who you come in touch with.
Thank you, Judge Yacknin. Melanie?
I think what I want, again, thank you for giving us this time. Trafficking is not this thing that just happens. It is caused because we have a lot of vulnerable people in our society. We have an awful lot of children who have very, 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 very difficult upbringings. We have a society that is tolerant of sexual exploitation of adults and of children. We have a society, we are tolerant of people living in extreme poverty, of extreme discrimination, all sorts of things. We are tolerant of domestic violence. Trafficking is kind of where all of those things come to a head. You might not ever be able to, quote unquote, rescue a trafficking victim, but anything you can do to help make a child's life a little safer, a little less traumatic, any relationship, any long-term relationship you can build with a vulnerable person, all of those are good things. And they're in some way doing something to combat this.
Thank you, Melanie. Julie?
Yeah, to piggyback off of everybody, thank you so much for holding this panel discussion. I do think it's important. I do think that, we're able to reach, different areas now and professions, and especially in the cause world. I mean, this is something that traffickers use all the time. In order for a girl to be exploited, she has to be manicured. She has to look good. Traffickers know this. They use salons all the time. And I just really can't, with a clear conscience, know what I know and not be able to go out there and tell people about it and share this information and help other stylists. I mean, you get some girls that are just out of cause school at 18 and they're not looking for, signs and things of domestic violence or trafficking or anything. And even some of the girls that are trafficked, I think it's so important to hear from Melanie and Judge Yacknin, because some people that come in, they don't know they're being trafficked. The one thing that in at least our training that we really want to do with people is to let them know the girl might know that she's not being treated well. She might know that, this guy treats her like crap and she has to do things she really doesn't want to do, but she might not necessarily in her mind know I'm being trafficked. And so I think it's very, very important that we have conversations. I think it starts with conversations, and I think education is just gonna help so many people. And so I can't tell you how much I've learned from Melanie. And I just met Judge Yacknin the other day, and I'm so happy to hear about the court and everything and all the different programs that are going on, because it's really, I think all of us working together, we can create real change, and we can at least educate and help people know what to do when they're in a situation. And I just think that it's good for all of us to be having conversations like this. So thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you, Julie. Jake?
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. It's nice seeing a lot of the same faces from court, and Julie and Melanie. It was nice to meet you. It's been an honor for the past year and a half to work with BadenStreet to help human trafficking clients. As surprised as I have been about the scale of the crime in Rochester, I've been even more surprised about how many resources keep coming up every week for these clients. And for a subject as sad and visceral as human trafficking, I found a lot of joy by working with some of the clients and the people every week. And I really appreciate the talk, because it's going to hopefully inspire more people to pay attention. So thank you.
Thanks, Jake. Jennifer?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for being here this evening. As a person who works with the 10 to 21 range, I really think it's important that households encourage open communication, ask open-ended questions, normalize discussions around body development, puberty, using the proper names for our body parts. And obviously, I'm a big proponent of comprehensive sex ed for all, and what that looks like across the lifespan for folks. And then getting into some of those other topics like consent, bodily autonomy. And I think a lot can come through open-ended conversations, and then also talking to young people about trusted and safe adults, because the trusted adult may not be safe. And I know Vivona does a lot of work around that in our community. And I encourage everyone here, if you're interested in the subject matter, take the effort to learn more, to be an advocate, to bring this back to the people that are in your circle, and share that information, because it does take more than just one of us. You know, as corny as it is sometimes, the village approach model is for the win. So thank you all so much for your time and energy this evening.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks to everyone for taking the time to be part of this panel. We do have some resources slides that we'd like to put up. Not just for being part of this panel, but for the work you do in the community. We truly appreciate you participating. I always like to close these sessions by reminding people about BadenStreet Settlement and what we do. We have a number of services. Of course, you've heard about our MCTP program that Jennifer's a part of, and our behavioral health program that Jake is a part of. But we have community youth and adult development. We have daycare, pre-kindergarten services, addiction counseling, and emergency family assistance. BadenStreet is always here, and we're part of the community. And we truly appreciate you guys participating. So Thanks to all. Thanks to Lee and Cameron, our technical team here, and thanks to all our panelists.